Mark Richardson had always loved his above-ground pool. It was a modest 18-foot round pool that had been the centerpiece of countless summer gatherings for his family over the past 7 years. Purchased secondhand from a retiring neighbor in 2016, the pool had weathered countless summers, its blue liner faded but still functional, telling stories of joy, laughter, and family memories. The pool's journey began when Mark's kids were still young. Emma, now 16, had learned to swim in its shallow waters. Jake, 14, had hosted countless pool parties that transformed their backyard into a teenage paradise. Even the family dog, Max, a golden retriever who had since passed away, used to paddle around its edges on particularly hot days, bringing smiles to everyone's faces. But time had taken its toll. The pool's metal frame showed signs of rust, and the liner had developed several small patches that required constant maintenance. Replacement parts were becoming increasingly difficult to find, and the pump had been repaired more times than Mark could count. What was once a source of endless summer fun was now becoming more of a burden than a blessing. Mark's wife, Sarah, a practical elementary school teacher, had been suggesting they remove the pool for the past 2 seasons. "We're spending more money keeping it operational than we would to replace it," she would argue during their weekend discussions. Their children were growing older, spending more time with friends and less time splashing around in the backyard. The final decision came after a particularly challenging maintenance weekend. Mark had spent an entire Saturday attempting to patch a persistent leak, his clothes soaked, frustration mounting with each unsuccessful repair. As he stood there, covered in pool chemicals and defeat, he realized Sarah was right. The pool had served its purpose, creating memories that would last far longer than the physical structure itself. Their backyard, once dominated by the large blue oval, was about to undergo a transformation. Mark had already sketched plans for a raised garden, something Sarah had always wanted. The kids were excited about the possibility of a small patio where they could hang out with friends, a more age-appropriate space for their evolving lifestyles. Little did Mark know that his simple decision to remove the aging pool would soon catapult him into an unbelievable neighborhood dispute that would become the talk of their quiet suburban street. The pool's removal would prove to be far more. On a crisp Saturday morning, Mark began the process of dismantling the pool. He carefully removed the liner, disconnected the pump, and started taking apart the metal frame. His teenage son helped him, making the work go faster. They were methodical and careful, ensuring they didn't damage any surrounding property or create unnecessary mess. Neighbors walked by, some offering a friendly wave, others watching with mild curiosity. Karen Matthews had been watching the Richardson family's pool removal with growing agitation from behind her meticulously trimmed living room curtains. At 52, she was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic and perceived property values. Her reputation preceded her. A woman who had previously called the Homeowners Association about everything from unevenly mowed lawns to Halloween decorations that remained up past November 1st. The Matthews property was a testament to her obsessive control. Every blade of grass was perfectly manicured, every shrub pruned with surgical precision. Her white picket fence wasn't just a boundary, it was a statement of her rigid worldview. Neighbors whispered about her behind her back, telling stories of her countless complaints and confrontations. As Mark and Jake continued dismantling the pool, Karen's anxiety reached a boiling point. In her mind, the empty space where the pool once stood represented more than just a temporary construction zone. It was a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. She had spent years cultivating the perfect image of their suburban street, and this pool removal threatened everything she had worked to maintain. Her husband, Bob, had long since learned to stay out of her crusades. A retired accountant who preferred the comfort of his armchair and baseball games, he would occasionally mumble, "Let it go, Karen." But his words rarely penetrated her resolute mindset. Today was different. Today, she was going to take action. Dressed in her standard weekend attire, pressed khaki pants, and a crisp white polo shirt, Karen marched out of her house. Her smartphone was clutched tightly in her right hand, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously against the screen. She had already pulled up the non-emergency police number, her thumb hovering over the call button. The neighborhood seemed to pause. Mr. Rodriguez, who was trimming his hedges, stopped mid-snip. The Johnson kids riding their bikes slowed to watch. Even the neighborhood's stray cat, usually indifferent to human drama, seemed to sense something was about to happen. "This is completely unacceptable," Karen muttered to herself, her voice rising with each step towards the Richardson property. In her mind, she was performing a public service. The pool's removal was going to destroy property values, create safety hazards, and potentially attract undesirable elements to their pristine street. As she approached the edge of the Richardsons' property, Mark and Jake were carefully sorting the pool's metal frame. Jake noticed her first, nudging his father. Dag," he whispered, "I think we got a situation." Mark turned, offering a polite nod. "Morning, Karen," he said, hoping to diffuse any potential tension. But Karen was beyond pleasantries. Her face had turned an alarming shade of red. a combination of anger and what seemed like a misplaced sense of moral righteousness. With dramatic flair, she raised her phone and dramatically dialed the police, her finger jabbing at the scream of precision. "Hello, police," she began, her voice loud enough for the entire street to hear. "I need to report a serious neighborhood violation. This property is creating an imminent safety hazard." Mark and Jake exchanged bewildered looks. Neither could have predicted the extraordinary sequence of events about to unfold, a neighborhood dispute that would soon become local legend. Two patrol cars rolled up to the Richardson residence within 20 minutes of Karen's call. Officers Derek Martinez and Lisa Chen, seasoned veterans of the local police force, exchanged knowing glances as they approached. They had responded to countless neighborhood disputes, but something about this dispatch felt different. Mark stood bewildered, still wearing his work gloves and covered in a light sheen of sweat from dismantling the pool. Jake had retreated slightly, standing near the garage with a mix of embarrassment and curiosity. The neighborhood had begun to gather. Mr. Rodriguez had stopped pruning his hedges, and the Johnson kids had abandoned their bike ride, watching the unfolding drama with wide-eyed fascination. Officer Martinez stepped forward first, his professional demeanor masking a hint of amusement that threatened to break through his serious expression. "Sir, we received a report of a potential safety hazard," he began, his clipboard at the ready. Karen, who had positioned herself dramatically at the edge of the property line, began her elaborate explanation. Her hands moved frantically, painting an increasingly bizarre picture of impending neighborhood doom. "This pool removal is going to destroy everything," she proclaimed, her voice rising with each word. "Do you have any idea what an empty pool space means for our community?" Officer Chen struggled to maintain her professional composure, her lips pursed to prevent a smile. Karen continued her tirade, her accusations becoming more elaborate with each passing moment. She claimed the empty pool space would create a massive sinkhole that could swallow children whole, attract unsavory urban wildlife like raccoons and possums, dramatically lower property values by at least 30%, become a breeding ground for mosquitoes and other dangerous insects, potentially become a secret meeting spot for neighborhood teenagers. Mark listened in stunned silence, occasionally looking at the officers with an expression that mixed disbelief and mild amusement. Jake, meanwhile, was recording the entire interaction on his smartphone, a decision he would later be grateful for. Officer Martinez attempted to interject several times, but Karen was on a roll. She produced a 3-ring binder filled with what she claimed was comprehensive neighborhood research, complete with color-coded tabs and highlighted sections. The binder appeared to be a meticulously compiled document of perceived neighborhood threats, with the pool removal now taking center stage. "Ma'am," Officer Chen finally managed to say, "removing a pool on one's own property is completely legal. In fact, it's not something we have any jurisdiction over." Karen's face transformed. The righteous anger gave way to a mixture of shock and indignation. But the children," she sputtered, her final desperate attempt to justify her call. The officers exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They had seen many neighborhood disputes, but this was approaching legendary status. Mark, sensing the absurdity of the moment, couldn't help but chuckle softly. As Karen realized her complaint was going nowhere, her demeanor changed. The loud, accusatory tone gave way to a defeated mumble. The neighborhood witnesses, who had been watching with rapt attention, began to whisper and snicker. Little did anyone know this was just the beginning of a neighborhood saga that would be talked about for years to come. The pool removal had become something far more than a simple home improvement project. It was now a full-blown local spectacle. The aftermath of Karen's failed police complaint quickly became the most talked-about event in the neighborhood's recent history. Officer Martinez took a moment to address the growing crowd of onlookers, his professional tone barely concealing a sense of bemusement. "Mr. Richardson is well within his legal rights to remove a pool from his private property," he stated clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Karen, however, was not one to accept defeat gracefully. Her face, previously red with anger, now transitioned to a pale shade of humiliation. She attempted one final protest, her voice wavering. "But the property values," she began, only to be cut short by Officer Chen's raised hand. "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, "removing a pool is a standard home improvement decision. It's not a criminal matter." A subtle emphasis on criminal sent a clear message that made several neighbors stifle their laughs. Mr. Rodriguez, who had been watching from his perfectly manicured front yard, couldn't resist adding fuel to the fire. "Karen," he called out, his thick accent adding weight to his words, "I've been thinking of removing my hot tub. Should I call the police too?" The surrounding neighbors erupted in laughter, which only served to deepen Karen's mortification. Jake, still recording on his smartphone, captured every moment of the interaction. Little did Karen know the video would soon become a viral sensation in their local community groups. Emma, Mark's daughter, was already planning to help her brother edit the footage into a comedic masterpiece. Bob Matthews, Karen's long-suffering husband, had emerged from their house during the confrontation. He looked like a man who had seen this scenario play out countless times before. With a heavy sigh that spoke volumes, he gently touched Karen's elbow. "Maybe we should go inside," he suggested, his tone a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. Mark, showing more grace than many would in such a situation, attempted to diffuse the tension. "Karen," he said softly, "if you're concerned about anything, I'm happy to discuss it." But his olive branch was met with a cold, silent glare. The police officers completed their report, making it abundantly clear that no laws had been broken. As they prepared to leave, Officer Martinez couldn't help but add, "Quite the interesting call today," with a barely concealed smirk. His partner, Officer Chen, simply shook her head, the hint of a smile playing on her lips. Neighbors who had been watching began to disperse, but not before exchanging knowing glances and barely contained chuckles. The Johnson kids, who had been watching the entire scene, were practically bursting with excitement to tell their friends about the neighborhood drama. As the police cars pulled away, the street settled into an unusual quiet. Mark and Jake returned to their pool removal project, now with an additional layer of local legend surrounding their simple home improvement task. The empty pool space, which had been the source of such controversy, now seemed almost anticlimactic. Sarah Richardson, who had been inside during most of the confrontation, came out to the backyard. "I missed everything, didn't I?" she asked, raising an eyebrow at her husband and son. Mark just smiled, knowing that this story would be told and retold at family gatherings for years to come. Karen retreated to her house, the sound of her front door closing feeling like a final punctuation mark to the entire ridiculous encounter. The neighborhood had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment of pure, unadulterated suburban absurdity that would become local folklore. In the weeks following the infamous pool removal incident, the Richardson family became something of local celebrities. The viral video of Karen's police complaint had spread like wildfire through local community Facebook groups, neighborhood apps, and even local social media pages. Jake's carefully edited video, complete with strategic cuts and dramatic pauses, had garnered over 50,000 views within just a few days. Local businesses began to catch wind of the story. Mike's Hardware, where Mark had rented his pool removal equipment, started offering pool removal survival kits with a tongue-in-cheek disclaimer about potential Karen encounters. The local coffee shop, Brew and Chew, created a specialty drink called the Pool Removal Panic, a smoothie topped with blue whipped cream meant to commemorate the incident. The Richardson family found themselves at the center of unexpected community support. Neighbors who had previously been mere acquaintances now stopped by with casseroles, offered to help with the yard renovation, and shared their own stories of neighborhood conflicts. Mr. Rodriguez brought over homemade empanadas, while the Johnson family offered their teenagers to help with the landscaping project. Sarah Richardson, always the most practical of the family, saw an opportunity in the unexpected fame. She started a small blog documenting their backyard transformation, sharing tips about home improvements and neighborhood dynamics. The blog quickly gained a following, with people from across the country sharing their own Karen encounter stories. Karen, meanwhile, had become increasingly isolated. The neighborhood's WhatsApp group, which she had once dominated with complaints, now treated her like a running joke. Her attempts to call the Homeowners Association or local authorities about various neighborhood infractions were met with eye rolls and barely concealed laughter. Bob Matthews seemed almost relieved by the change. He began spending more time in his workshop, occasionally venturing out to offer a sheepish wave to the neighbors. Those who knew him whispered that he appeared more relaxed than he had in years, free from the constant tension of his wife's crusades. The empty pool space gradually transformed into something beautiful. Mark and his family created a stunning garden that became the envy of the neighborhood. Native plants, a small meditation area, and a vegetable garden replaced the aging pool. Emma designed a zen-like space with succulents and decorative stones, while Jake added a basketball half-court that quickly became a gathering spot for neighborhood kids. Local news picked up the story, running a lighthearted segment about neighborhood dynamics and the infamous pool removal. The Richardson family was interviewed, with Jake stealing the show with his quick wit and comedic timing. Mark and Sarah watched proudly as their son became a local media darling, handling the attention with grace and humor. The incident became a watershed moment for the neighborhood. Residents began to look out for each other more, sharing laughs about the pool removal heard around the suburb. Community barbecues became more frequent, with the Richardson backyard often serving as the gathering spot. As for Karen, she eventually moved away the following year, unable to bear the constant reminders of her viral moment of infamy. The neighborhood threw a subtle farewell gathering, more a celebration of newfound community than a genuine send-off.